Greetings, I'm Endar. Today is the 7th of May 2023, and this is my review for the film Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs. This is my second attempt at recording this. The first one, I did the whole thing and the audio was garbled and no good. Alright, so I'm trying a different program now for recording, and it seems to be working. Alright. So, Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs is an animated adventure comedy film produced by Columbia Pictures and Sony Pictures Animation, directed by Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. It was first shown on the 12th of September 2009. It is loosely based on a 1978 children's book that was written by Judy Barrett and illustrated by Ron Barrett. This was my second time watching it, as I saw it in theaters when it first came out. So it had been a long time since I had seen it. So there will be spoilers ahead, so I encourage you to watch the film before listening if you're at all interested in seeing this movie and experiencing it firsthand. I think the casting was good for this movie, and each voice fit the character. I would say the most standout voice for me was Mr. T as Earl Devereaux, and also James Caan as Tim Lockwood was also a great voice. So the introduction shows Flint's intense desire to be an inventor, even from an early age, and how his inventions can be successful in a way, but also quite problematic, as they usually have some kind of fatal flaw to them. So one of them is the spray-on shoes that he uses in this show and tell at his class, and this is what the intro is. And at first it seems cool, but then the class's reaction, some people are like, well, how do you get them off? And he can't even get them off. And it was just, their reaction was kind of over the top ridiculous. So it's not really like a realistic situation, and this kind of shows, one of the things it sets up is that there's this bullied nerd who shows later on in life how smart he is, and earns the respect of the bully or whatever. They kind of double up on this with another main character, Sam Sparks, who's also nerdy, and she's a weatherwoman, and she just kind of shows that she's smarter than other people, which is a common thing seen in movies, I suppose. Another major plot point that's shown in this intro is this conversation between Flint and his mother, who really believes in him and his dream to be an inventor, and she gives him a lab coat that it's too big for him, but it's going to fit him later in life, and he always keeps this lab coat throughout the movie. And this clearly shows kind of his motivations to pursue that inventing dream throughout the movie. And his mother passes away, so it kind of just solidifies that he doesn't want to give up on this dream because his mom believed in him, and now his mom is gone. So, and she's gone after that intro basically, and it's just him and his father. So the setting is this small town on an island in the Atlantic Ocean called Chew and Swallow, and it's known for its sardines. That's the thing they have there, naturally. But they fall out of popularity at some point. And so the main plot for the movie is that Flint, the inventor, kind of continuously fails to create something that works well throughout his childhood. And maybe he's early 20s or something, or early adult for the majority of the movie. But basically he makes these things, and then these creations cause chaos. He makes these rat birds that just kind of cause chaos and attack people. And it's just, he's known as kind of being a nuisance for the town. And so he makes this device that can create food from water or water vapor, and it gets rocketed up into the clouds and is just sucking in clouds and making food, and he's able to program it to make specific types of food. And so this kind of solves the issue of only having like sardines to eat on the island. So the whole town is just really happy about it, except for his father. But anyways, over time, the molecular makeup of that food becomes more and more unstable. The food becomes huge, and it's raining down from the sky, wreaking havoc throughout the town, causing substantial damage. And he meets this weather girl, the fellow nerd, as the movie kind of plays it as, and they become kind of romantically entangled. And Flint struggles with his desire to be an inventor, with his late mother believing in that vision, and his father, who, he doesn't directly oppose his inventing career, but he basically does. He lets him try it for a long time, but then he's like, isn't it time to give that up? And he just wants him to help him run his bait and tackle shop. And then there's this mayor of the town who's just like this unhinged guy who's just doesn't really care about the town and uses whatever he can to make the town like more popular, or to just make more money from for the town through like tourism, that sort of thing. He's also a glutton, and he just becomes like he has an addiction to the food, and it really causes him problems, and he just kind of becomes more psychotic over time, sort of. Maybe he's not psychotic, but he really has an issue with it, and he just gets in the way of Flint stopping it when it's becoming a problem. As far as the characters go, I think Flint, the main character, is a pretty good character. I especially thought it was funny when he was like in his inventing mode, and he would like speed around making like sound effects and stuff, like, for his like door opening and things like that. And then his father, Tim Lockwood, is also a decent character. He makes like these fishing analogies to try to explain things to Flint, which is funny. Yeah, and Flint and him just show kind of this important struggle of like a father and son not really understanding each other, and kind of having like being from like two different kind of worlds. And then, there's these other side characters, Earl, who's like a police guy, and then his son Cal, and they're just very funny, pretty much any scene with them. Overall, I think the creators maybe could have done more to show like other people being intelligent rather than just the two main characters. They often show like, for instance, Tim Lockwood, the father, he can't express himself. And then we got baby Brent, who's like this guy who's like one of the bullies, and he's famous for basically being on an advertisement when he was a baby, and he's just coasting on that success. Which I think that's a cool element to show, is just like that people can get stuck relying on like things that they've accomplished in the past, and then like nowadays they're lacking any kind of meaningful progression. And I think with Tim Lockwood, they kind of show that he understands some fundamental truths about maybe like what's acceptable and safe for the town, whereas like everyone else is just oblivious to the fact that the food falling from the sky is just really wasteful, and they have like this landfill of all the wasted food, and it's just like, it has velocity to it, so it's just destroying things when it lands sometimes. Who else? There's this other side character. There's the mayor, who, he doesn't really seem like a real mayor, because he's so careless and doesn't really seem to like know what would be good for the town. He's just really selfish in reality, so it's not really believable that he would become a mayor, I feel like. And then the camera guy is this other side character, who's the camera guy for Sam Sparks' weather show, and he was really hilarious. Just pretty much anything that he said, like he just had these like hidden talents. Like they needed a doctor at one point. He's like, yeah, I'm a doctor. And they're like, oh, we need a pilot. And he's like, yeah, I'm a pilot too, and I'm a comedian. And he's just like talented guy who just doesn't really say much, but when it's time, he shows up. So yeah, the story is told in a pretty predictable way, complete with the nerd meets nerd romance. You've got the bully realizing his mistakes in life, and then you have the father and son learning to understand each other. And there isn't really a huge like antagonistic character. I mean, there's sort of the mayor, but he's more there just to create additional humor and just, I don't know, kind of make these basic roadblocks for Flint along the way. And ultimately, yeah, the mayor pays for his mistakes really by his own hand. And then I guess probably the main antagonist would be the device itself that's making the food, as it becomes like sentient and becomes this like huge meatball, like protecting. There's like this huge meatball around it protecting it from like, being penetrated and being shut down. The ending was satisfying to watch, but also mostly predictable. Flint and his father kind of come to an understanding in this clever way where, so one of Flint's creations is this monkey thought reader device he has on his like friend, his monkey friend, Steve. And anyways, like Sam grabs the monkey thought reader device when Tim is showing that he's unable to express himself, and she puts it on him, and then like, yeah, the device is just basically saying directly all of his feelings very clearly, and like what he thinks and feels about Flint. And it's a cool moment, it's an emotional moment, and it's pretty nice. And then Flint and Sam kiss, which it's like, yeah, I guess they built up their romance throughout this movie, but maybe unnecessary. I don't know. It is fun, I guess. A little bit of fun for the romance, but yeah, it's pretty goofy how they kiss because of the character designs visually, which is the next thing I want to talk about. Visually, the movie was kind of a mixed bag for me. The character designs weren't really that great. And the proportions were just kind of wild. Like Sam was this like tiny stick figure person with just a tiny nose, and then Flint's nose is like 30 times the size of her nose. And so when they try to kiss, it's funny because they like can't because of their proportions, and they have to like basically put a bunch of air in their mouth and balloon up their mouths just to be able to get their lips to touch, which is, admittedly, that's goofy, but yeah, these character designs are just, I don't know, not my favorite. But as far otherwise, like the animation's really smooth, and it was like particularly nice seeing the food fall from the sky, as it starts out like pretty harmless, and then it progresses to become like this apocalyptic event towards the end. So yeah, the food, visuals, and effects was like the main strength of the movie, which of course is important based on like what this movie is. The sound was fine, the music was fitting, but didn't really stand out. The pacing of the movie felt quite good. It is pretty quickly paced, and it's not a super long movie, which is probably for the better. But it did move along, and it kept me interested. And I would say especially the humor helped sustain the movie and just keep it going. It's basically constantly funny, just jokes everywhere. I did become sleepy at one part, which was like towards the end when they're infiltrating the meatball where the device is. So I rewatched that section afterwards. But I do think the length was appropriate for this movie, and it had kind of the right amount of depth for the plot and the characters, and it did feel quite cohesive and smooth, like overall in these categories. My favorite scene was when Flint, he made ice cream rain down from the sky for Earl's son's birthday at the request of Earl. And they're talking about doing these snowball fights, and he's like, I've never been in a snowball fight. And he's like, what are the rules and stuff? And then he decides he's going to play. And he's just like, just throwing ice cream balls like full force at kids or people in general, like headshotting them. And it's just hilarious because it just seems so random, and like the tone of it, and like, yeah, it's funny because it seems almost a bit brutal, but yeah, quite amusing. That's legitimately very funny. I also liked like any scene that had Earl in it, which is the policeman. Like there's this one part where he's chasing down Flint, and then Flint's like, oh hey, a jaywalker, and then he just like immediately jumps and just does this like twist midair and tackles this guy. It's just funny. Yeah, and there's this part when the food first falls from the sky and everybody's reacting to it. they basically show this like reaction shot, same like angle, same shot on everybody, all these different people, and they all have like basically the same reaction where they like open their mouth, make this like face, and then gasp, and it's pretty funny. It just goes on for quite a while, and it's just like, wow, this joke is going for a while, but it was funny. And then another part, they're showing Sam's weather show dubbed into different like languages and different places, and they're showing it dubbed into British accent English for the UK, even though the normal version's English anyways, which is that's pretty funny. And then I also really liked the spaghetti tornado at the end, where it's just like it's gonna destroy the town. It just looked cool and menacing. Kind of reminds me of the game Overcooked a little bit, just with like these food monsters basically. And then there's another part where Cal, the son of Earl, he eats all this junk food and he basically passes out, and they're like, he's worried about him. He thinks he's like gonna die or something. He's like, we need a doctor, and the camera guy's like, oh yeah, I'm a doctor. And they're like, what? And then he grabs a piece of celery, this large piece of celery, because it's like oversized, and he breaks it next to Cal, and then that wakes him from his food coma. That's just, yeah, funny stuff. But I don't really have any profound feelings about this movie, like one way or another. I do think like the food effects and the apocalyptic scenes were the best part and fun to watch, but also just the humor all throughout just made it fun. The characters didn't really do much for me by themselves, but I guess some of the story stuff was good. And yeah, but the characters did feel a bit weak in that way, especially including their like visual design, which isn't really my favorite at all. But yeah, Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs does well as a standalone movie. I am curious where they went with the story in the sequel. There's also like a show. I can't really speak on how well this movie was adapted from the book or the show, as I haven't read or watched those. So in the future I might be able to touch on that, because I do plan to watch the sequel for this movie. A little bit of trivia. Interestingly, the directors were fired after working on the script for like a year, and then they were later rehired. They rewrote the script, and they're almost fired again, as the head of Sony Pictures criticized it for lacking story. So they added Flint's father Tim, and like the relationship between them and those kind of plot points, which I do agree with that addition. I think the movie definitely wouldn't have had much substance for a story without him being added, and it would have just been more of a pure like comedy thing, I think, at that point. Overall, I enjoyed the movie, even on the second time watching it, and it was a fun time with just constant humor, cool food weather chaos, and it was good enough that I do want to check out the sequel, and I hope it's decent. I'm also curious about the children's book, which I can probably just blast through sometime if I'm at like in a library or something. And yeah, I may rewatch this movie again someday. I don't really have a strong desire to, but I could see myself doing it sometime, maybe. And I recommend this movie to people who like this sort of animation. Probably a lot of kids would enjoy the movie, and some adults would if this sort of like humor and animation appeals to you. And my rating for Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs is 79. And this number may change over time as I review more films. 70 to 79 scores are for things that I generally enjoyed and have a decent chance of me engaging with again in the future. But for now, I'm going to the sequel. That will be all. Thanks for listening.